The last time I was in LA was in 92.
Yeah.
Was that day
Oh,
in
wow.
92.
Really?
When we lost
Oh, no.
Jeff. And I remember going,
Yeah.
it's not why I haven't been back. I've just raised another family. But, you look you up in Wiki, biographies will always say, Jeff Porcaro, how important was he to you? The obvious question.
Well, I mean, I can get really deep for your folks here because, there's in one regard, when a musician is associated to another musician with a particular amount of direct contact, it's kind of held in poor regard. You know what I mean? Like typically, it's like, man, who are you? You know what I mean? The attitude, and that should be, that's rightfully so. But what Jeff is for me, and this is deep, right? Because and I understand this now, just because of the years of searching and things that we do. Any musician that we're all inspired by things we hear, and then the first thing we do is we try to emulate. That's real important to us. I in my personal, and not to get heavy, but this is important because this is why it's more than the typical influence that the sound of someone's playing has on somebody. I had not like a disfiguring type traumatic thing when I was 4 years old in my development, nothing molestation or anything like this, something that's more psychological, that through my life and development that you figure out how to deal with these things and sort them out. And so for me, the thing, I grew up in a musical family. My dad's a wonderful musician. I grew up in the studio with him. Truly, and all the people I've worked with, he literally is on the level with all of them. Even though he was in a smaller sphere and whatever, I was so fortunate to have him for a father. And I got to crawl around studios before I could walk, you know what I mean? Even though it was in South Carolina and outside the people that I was in, one of the drummer I sat in the corner of a drum booth, 4 years old, watching this guy named Buster Phillips play, who is still one of the, and it's not because of my affinity for my childhood. Like, I have recordings. This guy was so into Steve Gadd then, and in South Carolina, he's like one of the best groove drummers I've ever heard. So I got to sit in that corner, when every kid wants to play drums, give me my pots and pans or whatever, and I'm sitting in the studio, and osmosis is giving me that, you know what I mean? Right. And then on the radio, the earliest things that stuck out to me happened to come back around to Jeff Porcaro over and over. So as a kid experiencing the radio, and I'm locking into things, not knowing names, you know what I mean, but songs, you know what I mean, the ones that I wanted to hear, and my dad would point things out to me when I was very young. But what it comes down to, I had an impactful thing that can really affect a person's confidence, right? Like it kind of changes the way you develop and assimilate around people. Well, the biggest thing I get from Jeff Porcaro, and the only question I ever asked anybody inside the band about him, I never asked him, what'd you guys do this day? Or when you were doing this, right? I never brought the subject up. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, Sklar wanted me to do an interview several times about it, and I just wasn't comfortable. You know what I mean? I didn't quite know what to say. You know what I mean? Wanted me to address Jeff in a particular way, and I didn't quite have the right words. You know what I mean? I could talk about a drummer. There's 1,000 guys that talked about him as a drummer. It's different than that for me. And how can I say that? So it comes down to this. I asked Steve Porcaro. The only thing I asked him ever. And it was just kind of passive. We were the last two guys getting off the bus one day, We're in the back lounge. I said, man, where did Jeff get his confidence? Confidence, right? Because that's what I hear. You know what I mean? That's what I feel when I feel that guy play. It's a particular kind of confidence. And he turns around and said, right, he got that and I got anxiety, you know what I mean? And just walked off the bus. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, exactly, man. That dude had confidence like that from the time he could walk, And when you think about, and I know you understand this, from your history of rock, rock and roll, how relevant and being a drummer, how still contemporary, and he is mentioned and regarded like he's still here regularly. He still shows up in print media. He's not gone anywhere, and it really isn't. I guess what I look at it too is he never had the self-doubt to deviate from his voice of playing in whatever situation he was cast in, and whatever he never felt like, oh, this is a song that sounds like something Steve Gadd would play. I need to do my Steve Gadd version of Jeff Porcaro. You know what I mean? Like, he never left Jeff Porcaro. And it's like, hey, look, my feel is what I've got. You know what I mean? And my interpretation of the arrangement of the tune is what I've got. And so that comes from the confidence of never second guessing a choice, about yourself. Right. And so that's why he's important to me is like, I'm still chasing, those demons and trying to figure out, how I can just get that noise out of my mind and be that confident in my skin. You know what I mean? And then if I can do that, then as a player, it follows suit. You know what I mean? But that is the essence of what it isn't in the notes, and it isn't in the whatever. You can hear that thing in every note he ever played. You know what I mean? And that's what's different about him. Like I know the things that technically send drummers off their mark, even if it's minuscule moments of I'm in it, and then I thought about this, and I'm out for 1/8 note. You know what I mean? And nobody notices that, but you know where that lives. You know what I mean? And Jeff's remarkable because you can't find that. You can't find a correction like the time moved this way, and now I'm accountable to the metronome or to whatever's happening, and I have to make a correction. So all of a sudden there's this ugly bump in the time, you know what I mean, of something, right? That's beyond drumming. Like, you have to be so confident in what you have to give that you won't deviate from that, And that, again, that's why Jeff is still so deeply relevant to me. And I think in most people that still admire him and speak of him in a certain way, that's what they're experiencing too. They just think it's the drums. You know what I mean? They just think it's the drums. But what he's giving you is a representation of self-confidence,
I have never, ever heard it put that way before. You just blew my freaking mind.
I've thought about it a little bit. You know what I mean?
Holy snapping turtles. Yes, I said snapping turtles.
Yeah.